So, apparently Balena Etcher is on the bad side of things. I don't know. Don't know the details, but Tails is warning against using Balena Etcher for writing to USB drives for their stuff. So to transfer drive images on an ISO or image format, you can use the dd command at the terminal of Unix-like operating systems, for example, or you can use the convenient way via programs with a simple user interface, which do this with just a few mouse clicks. Balena Etcher is such a program popular and often used, but now the Tails project, which is developing an anonymizing Linux distro, is warning against the use of it. Let's see, explains the reasons for this decision. Tails has recommended Balena Etcher to install Tails from Mac OS and Windows on a USB stick. The decisive factor was the simplicity with which the program can be used. Also supports Macs. Shortly afterward, Balena Etcher started displaying This Is Why. Tails developers didn't like this, but initially didn't see it as a major privacy problem and simply didn't have a better alternative at hand. In 2024, the situation changed, began to share the file name of the image and the model of the USB stick with the company and possibly third parties. While we have not yet experienced or heard of any attacks on Tails users as a result of this change, but we believe that it presents potential for abuse. That's the thing, is they're sharing what you're doing with their program to companies and what you're specifically writing. To eliminate the risk entirely, we have, again, looked for alternatives. So it's nice they're looking out for the users. 7 ISO image tools were considered, with Rufus coming out on top in the end. Rufus is pretty out there and oldish. But yeah, anyway, sometimes old is good. The team had already tested the tool years ago, but found it much more difficult to use. It also changed the Tails image in an unspecified way, which the Tails maintainers classified as risky. However, the company behind Rufus, Akeo Consulting, has since really improved the usability and reliability of the tool. In the instructions for macOS, Tails has not yet replaced Balena Etcher. On the one hand, Rufus doesn't run under it. On the other hand, Tails doesn't run on Apple Silicon. People who install Tails from macOS also represent less than 10% of all installations. For macOS, however, they recommend using DD on the command line or the Raspberry Pi Imager. The Raspberry Pi Imager runs under Linux, Mac, and Windows, and can therefore be considered an all-purpose weapon for writing drive images to the SD cards or USB sticks. With Rufus, however, there are also slight reservations on our side. Under Windows, the widely used Win32 disk imager often performs well. However, there are cases in which it doesn't work. In one case, a remedy in the form of an update only came 3 years after the error message was received by the project. So, it's interesting. Let's go look at Rufus. Okay. Yeah. So, have I used this one? I think I have a little bit, or I was using a... There have been a couple projects. If you're used to old interfaces and how clunky they were, Rufus really isn't all that bad to use. It's halfway like Windows default stuff with a couple extra things that you can implement it into the window. So like you've of course got your image at your drive that you're writing to, your image that you're writing to it, and then like you're selecting a size maybe. You've got other options you can add in partitioning scheme that are like don't show up in the target system, that don't show up as defaults. Of course, the volume label is going to show up in the Windows one. File system, maybe not. Quick format, yeah, you're going to have that option, and a couple others. For the most part, it's going to be familiar if you used the Windows writer before. Now, being as it's been developed over the last few years and is still in active development, in fact, there was an update just today, as of recording, it makes it nicer. And then there's the portable version, of course, as well. So Rufus is pretty easy, portable, and things like that to run. It doesn't take much. Balena Etcher, I haven't paid too much attention, if I can spell good. Balena Etcher has obviously been the one that has been the de facto for like forever for a lot of people. It's like, oh, use Balena Etcher, this, that, and the other. Now that they're transmitting that data, you can actually firewall Balena Etcher from being able to phone home with your file name. But yeah. Let's see. Yeah. Anyway. Again, I like old, simple programs like this because half the time you're not going to have that issue because the developers aren't building something fancy. They're just building something that works. And when you're on Windows, Rufus does a really good job. I've had a couple different Rufus-like programs that I've used to write stuff to. So if I had like my old external hard drive from high school, for example, it is labeled as multi-boot, but that's due to the nature of having written a program to it, that allowed me to do multi-boot ISOs, so I could run multiple different Linux ISOs from one hard drive. I just booted into Grub, selected the ISO I wanted, and it went and ripped and roared. It's kind of like Ventoy, which is a standard now for that kind of a thing. I could even just drag and drop ISOs into it, and Grub would automatically find the ISOs, and I could boot into those, and it would work just fine. So yeah, Rufus basically wipes the whole thing, though. So you're kind of dealing with that. But the other one, they talked about Raspberry Pi Imager, and you could use that. DD is basically my standard way to do things. So if I go d-help, you can see all the options that you have. It's actually a pretty powerful tool. And if you're not paying attention, you'll accidentally write over your external hard drive with a ISO that you didn't mean to write onto it with, because you didn't pay attention to which drive you were accessing and writing on. But that's a whole other issue, and I've already done a video or two on that, and I've still got to consolidate a lot of things that I've recovered from that flub up. But anyway, and DD is available on Mac and Linux. So in large part, the big one is going to be Mac running it. And yeah, my Win stuff is being really weird, but yeah. So if you're on Windows, Rufus is your one. If you're on Linux or Mac, DD is the way to go, for sure, far and above. And you can get progress updates with DD as well. All you do is, what was it? You go status and then progress. Status equals progress, and you're going to get transfer statistics as it goes. And you can get a rough idea of how far along it is. And yeah, so then it'll spit stuff out and there. So if you want a private experience, that's the way to go. I like the old stuff. They're kind of clunky, but they tend to work. If you liked the content, if you enjoyed it, if you think I deserve it, like, comment, subscribe. Leave any criticisms you have or what have you. I appreciate it. Feed that algorithm, like I said, and I will see you guys in the next one.